Ingrid and Eric Halverson's journey to Washington Territory took place in the spring and summer of 1876 as the family left Minnesota for the far western edge of the American frontier. The decision to leave. It began with silence. That winter, Eric had spent long evenings staring at maps by lamplight, his thick fingers tracing rivers and mountain passes, his brow furrowed. The Minnesota soil was good, but not good enough. More Norwegians arrived every year, and the land around them was already carved up by neighbors and surveyors. Eric wanted something else, more room, more independence. Ingrid didn't speak against it. She rarely did. But when he said Washington, she looked out the window for a long time, her hand resting on the soft curve of her belly, pregnant again with their third child. "I want to see the mountains," she finally whispered. That was all, and that was enough. They sold everything they couldn't carry: furniture, barrels, the old stovepipe, the farm tools that were too heavy. Ingrid wrapped the family Bible and her wedding spoon in linen and tucked them deep into the wagon. Eric kept his only axe, his rifle, and his father's silver pocket watch. Elise was 5. Henrik was 3. They were too young to understand what it meant to leave everything. Ingrid packed their quilts, their carved toys, and the doll her sister had sent from Norway years before. She sewed coins into the hems of the children's coats just in case. In late April, they joined a wagon train leaving from western Minnesota, bound for the Oregon Trail and the lands beyond. At first, the journey felt like an adventure. The oxen moved slow but steady, and the wagon groaned like an old ship beneath the weight of barrels, bedding, and tools. The days were long and dusty. The wheels kicked up dry soil that clung to everything: skin, teeth, eyelashes. Eric walked most of the way, his boots wearing down with every mile. Ingrid sat on the bench beside him, one hand on her belly and the other keeping Henrik from tumbling off the side. In May, they crossed the Dakotas. The grasslands went on forever. Wind that never stopped. They saw antelope and once a herd of buffalo in the distance. Thundering black shapes moving like smoke over the hills. Nights were cold, but stars stretched endlessly overhead. Elise would ask, "Mama, is that heaven?" And Ingrid would tell her stories from the old country. Stories of sea spirits and the midnight sun, of how the stars were the souls of sailors lost at sea. Somewhere west of the Black Hills, they lost an ox to sickness. Eric buried it with a stone hammer and didn't speak the rest of the day. They had to lighten the wagon, tossing out bags of flour and extra clothes. Ingrid wept silently as she tossed a hand-woven shawl into the prairie grass. By June, the rains had stopped, and the sun baked the land until cracks split the earth. Water was harder and harder to find. Some families even turned back. A child in a nearby wagon died of fever, and Elise had night terrors after that, waking up sobbing and crying for home. Ingrid stayed strong, outwardly, but inside, the silence in her grew deeper. She stopped singing. Her dreams were full of salt water again. July would bring the mountains. Eric had heard that they would be hard, but the steep, narrow passes were beyond what he imagined. Sometimes they had to unload the wagon and carry things up by hand. Elise and Henrik clung to the sides of the trail. The drop below them was dizzying. Ingrid's ankles swelled, and she bled lightly one morning. Eric panicked, thinking he might lose the child, but Ingrid only closed her eyes and said, "It's not her time yet." One afternoon they were caught in a summer storm, and lightning struck so close that the air turned metallic and the oxen screamed. They took shelter in a rocky overhang, the four of them huddled under quilts, Ingrid shielding her stomach, whispering prayers in a voice Eric hadn't heard since Norway. By late August, the trail sloped downward. They followed the Columbia River westward, its massive flow like a vein of silver slicing through the wilderness. The air changed, drier, dustier, hotter. The trees grew sparser. The grasses turned gold. The last leg was the hardest. Fewer people, no towns, just open land and scrub. But there, among the wide fields and quiet wind, Eric saw what he had been looking for. Land with space enough to breathe, rivers to draw water from, hills to break the wind, wild but not barren. They settled on a stretch of land northeast of what would become Spokane. Just creek, grass, sky, and endless silence. When they finally arrived to their destination, they pitched a tent. Nothing more. Eric would start the cabin the next morning. That night they ate dried apples and beans, sitting on the ground together. Ingrid leaned against him, utterly exhausted, her face drawn but peaceful. The sun dipped low, turning the horizon orange and purple. "I think we've come to the end of the world," she murmured. Eric looked at her, surprised. But then she smiled, a quiet, trembling smile, and added, "And maybe the beginning of a new one."